Doctors warn us to limit the amount of salt we eat. But the taste of salt is hard to resist, and it's all around us. In French fries, potato chips, hot dogs, pickles, olives, salted nuts, and more. There's also a lot of salt in dishes that you may not think of as salty, including most soups and packaged foods. Here's some important information on salt's effects on the body and how you can create your own tasty low-salt meals.
Do you reach for the salt shaker first thing when you sit down for a meal? Your circulatory system wants you to think twice before you do. Dr. Mandeep Mehra of the University of Maryland Medical Center has researched the effects of diets that are high in salt.
When you have too much salt or too much sodium, one of the major problems that one sees is that the blood pressure and the neurohormones, or hormones that determine the increase in blood pressure, rise dramatically in response to that salt load, as a result of which the blood pressure in the brain is disrupted to a degree that one can develop a stroke.
Excess salt causes the body to retain more liquids than necessary. The heart has to work harder to pump the extra liquids, which can result in higher blood pressure. Symptoms of a high sodium diet can vary.
So patients who have heart failure, for instance, if they consume too much salt, they develop more and more symptoms of congestion. So they become more short of breath on minimal activity, their legs swell up, they cannot get into their clothes as easily. This is one of the signs of consuming too much salt, which tends to retain fluid.
Seniors may be putting themselves at risk unintentionally because they are less sensitive to the taste of salt.
As the population ages, one of the trends that has been noticed is that patients tend to consume more and more salt. The reason for that lies in the fact that aging results in a decreased sensitivity to the flavor of salt, as a result of which, to achieve the same flavor, the elderly patients, particularly after the age of 65, tend to increase their salt intake.
Reducing the salt in your diet doesn't mean you have to eat bland and tasteless meals. Chef Valerie Woods of Chef Valerie LLC, based in Washington, D.C., suggests a few techniques to decrease salt without diminishing flavor.
I think all of us can become a little bit more creative in our cooking by trying new herbs, new spices, different oils, and just stop being lazy. I mean, a lazy cook just reaches for the salt shaker. I think using the other spices and things, it's going to add some zest in your life. It's going to make cooking fun. It's going to make your food interesting and help us all be healthy.
In fact, Chef Valerie recommends getting rid of your salt shaker altogether.
The next thing you can do is you can start preparing food with sea salt or kosher salt. And what's nice about those two particular types of salt is the salt dissolves very quickly, like in liquid. And because it dissolves quickly in the liquid, you will not keep adding salt to it, because a lot of times when you add regular table salt, it takes a while for it to get incorporated in the food. So you taste it, you don't taste it instantly, so you keep adding salt to it.
It's better to cook with your own fresh ingredients because you can control the amount of salt in your meals. Processed foods already have salt added before you prepare them.
There's always salt added to those because remember, it's packaged in a box, so it has a preservative in it to keep the shelf life. And just knowing that it's preserved, anything really that has a date on it. Think about it, when you buy a package, it has a date on it. The only way they can hold it for that long is because they put a preservative in it. So I would use that as my first order of defense. I love to use fresh herbs in cooking. Fresh herbs are great because they really can spice up your food a great deal. You can use, unfortunately, you have to use more fresh herbs when cooking than you do to dry herbs, which a lot of people don't realize, but you get a fresher flavor. It's a way of seasoning your food, and you definitely know there's no salt added to whatever you're making. We can add fresh garlic to an item, and garlic will also help add to the other flavors. And you really don't need salt when you're using garlic. You can add a whole bunch of garlic and you won't really need it. As far as lemon juice or lemon zest, what's good about those two items is you can use that as a marinade. You can also add vinegar to that as well. Any type of citrus or an orange or something like that is another alternative for marinades, as well as it gives it a nice flavor.
You can avoid using condiments and dressings that have high levels of sodium by making your own sauces through a process called reduction.
Reduction in sauce making is when you take a sauce and you might start out viewing it in a pan being maybe 1 inch in depth, and if you reduce it by half, it would be ½ an inch. So you're allowing the water to, or the other liquid to evaporate itself out, and as the liquid evaporates out, it intensifies the flavors that are already in the substance that you're preparing. And you never need to add any salt to it, because the food is going to get stronger and intensify naturally. And the reason for it is I want my food to be moist, and I don't want to have to reach for the ketchup or the marinara sauce in the refrigerator, which is a canned product. So I want to make my own sauce.
By taking a little extra time to prepare your food and learning a few new tricks, you can lose the salt without losing the flavor.
I personally feel that we as consumers, we don't need the salt shaker. There's so many items that we buy and we eat in restaurants and things of that nature that have salt added to it that we have no control over. So let's control our salt intake by not adding salt in things that we prepare ourselves.
Too much salt may be bad for you, but it's still an essential nutrient and a widely used means of preserving food. Joining me to discuss the plus side of salt is Dick Hanneman, president of the Salt Institute, an international trade association that represents salt producers around the world. Mr. Hanneman, welcome to the Daily Apple.
Nice to be with you.
So tell me a little bit about salt in your opinion. It's good for you?
Well, salt's essential. You die without it. But the interesting thing, you talked about the role as a preservative, and that a century ago was probably important. Not nearly as much important today, nor is it just for taste, but it is the other aspects of salt, the color, the binding, the other food technology questions that require the use of salt in foods.
One of the concerns that pertains to seniors in particular is the loss of taste buds as they get older. Are you concerned about the fact they may be putting too much salt on their food because they can't taste it?
Well, individuals will have medical problems and should consult with their doctors. But if you are a healthy person, no, I'm not too concerned about it. The kidney of an older person does not absorb salt nearly as well, so having more salt just gives them what they need.
Now, you get a lot of pushback, I'm sure, from people because salt, whether it's a wives' tale or not, everyone thinks that too much sodium is not good for you. What is some of the research that's out there that says the opposite?
Well, there is research that shows that too much of anything, including salt, is bad for you. The question is, what is too much? And it's a very heterogeneous effect. Most people think of the blood pressure effect, and blood pressure is one of the most important effects of salt, but also insulin resistance and the production of a kidney hormone. Your earlier guest talked about how the neurohormone system is activated on high salt diets. It's actually just the opposite. The production of a kidney hormone called renin skyrockets when you go on a low salt diet, and 400% greater incidence of heart attacks when that happens.
How does the consumption of salt in America differ from other cultures?
There's a very tight association around the world between 100 and 200 millimoles, which is 2,300 to 4,600 milligrams. Within that range, the United States is right in the middle, a little below 150 millimoles, or about 3,500 milligrams.
Where do most Americans consume their salt? From what kind of foods? Or
actually, white bread and dairy products are the largest source.
And in terms of salt, you said something interesting to me earlier, which was that if you mix salt in your food, it's worse than if you put it on at the table?
Well, again, one of your guests talked about how it would be better to throw your salt shaker away and try to cook with little salt. But this research has shown that as you add salt at the end, it's right on the outside of the food, your body senses it more quickly, and therefore the set point is reached. What a lot of people don't realize is that we eat a very predictable amount of salt, as do other animal species, and because of that, it may be that the salt is driving the caloric intake and not the other way around.
Oh, I see. What does it mean to be overly salt sensitive?
Salt sensitivity is a blood pressure term, and it turns out between 1/3 and 1/2 of the people have a significant fall in blood pressure on a low salt diet. And about 1/4 of the population has a significant increase in blood pressure on a low salt diet. The overall effect is slightly to lower blood pressure, and that is salt sensitivity. But most people are insensitive to salt, the majority of the population, and it's not the importance of blood pressure that we should be concerned about, but rather the health outcome. Blood pressure is an indicator that something is right or wrong with the system. Sure. But what we want to do is try to reduce the risk of cardiovascular events like heart attacks and extend cardiovascular mortality. The studies have shown in the U.S. population, 2 studies, the NHANES survey of the U.S. diet, which is a federal database, shows that the NHANE-1's study, the first one, showed a 20% greater mortality on low-salt diets, and the second one, just published this year by the president of the International Society of Hypertension, showed 37% greater mortality on low-salt diets.
Before we close, just to clarify for our viewers, how much salt is plenty of salt for a mature adult? Where should they stop? How many milligrams of sodium?
The body will tell you what that is. If you don't have a medical condition, the average amount between 1 and 2 teaspoons of salt a day, 2,300 to 4,600 milligrams, was described by Bjorn Folko, who's one of the great names in hypertension research, as the hygienic safety range for salt.
Okay. Thank you very much. This is great information. We appreciate your time.
Nice to be with you today.